I'm Amanda Leitner, and welcome to Rochester Rising, where we amplify the stories of Rochester entrepreneurs. Welcome to episode 242 of the podcast. Whether you are a first-time listener or you frequently listen in, thank you so much for deciding to spend some of your time with us today to learn more about small business and the culture of entrepreneurship in Rochester, Minnesota. We hope that you can learn something today from entrepreneurs themselves that can help with your own business journey. We release a podcast each Wednesday here at Rochester Rising. You can find all of our podcasts on our website at rochesterrising.org, or you can also listen in wherever you best like to connect with podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. In addition to our podcast, we have a ton of articles and videos that we've created over the past 5 years, telling the stories of both new and very experienced business owners. You can find all of that content on our website and find something that speaks directly to you. Our mission here at Rochester Rising is to amplify the stories of Rochester entrepreneurs and small business owners through original, insightful content. We launched the Rochester Rising storytelling platform in 2016 to tell these stories through unique articles, podcasts, and videos. Before Rochester Rising existed, we felt that stories of entrepreneurship in Rochester just weren't being told in an authentic manner, or they were not being told from the perspective of the entrepreneur and fully telling the story of what their journey was like in this city. We felt that it was time for entrepreneurship to be elevated in this community, and we knew that we had the right perspective as entrepreneurs ourselves to truly understand and be able to share these stories in an authentic, accurate manner. We work really hard to tell the stories of innovators in this community that otherwise would remain hidden. We believe in inspiration capital, making entrepreneurship accessible to everyone who wants to take that leap by telling the stories of people just like you who are taking that journey. We believe that small business is a critical part of this community that should be celebrated. Since Rochester Rising launched in 2016, we've released 418 articles and 242 unique podcasts. Throughout this work, we've told the stories of 208 unique businesses and 263 different entrepreneurs through in-depth interviews. We've done all this primarily through the work of one person, part-time, over all these years. And now we need your help. We need your help to keep telling these stories and to keep providing inspiration for people who want to be entrepreneurs and to keep elevating small business and the stories of small business in this community. Right now, we're running our latest and hopefully not our last fundraising campaign. If you found value in this platform, if you've had your story told by Rochester Rising, if you've learned at least one thing from any of the stories that we've told, we need your help and we need your support. Right now, we're running a fundraising campaign through October 15th. You can access the fundraiser by going to our website at rochesterrising.org and clicking on any of the buttons directing you to that. And you can also click the button or the link in our show notes wherever you're listening in. We've made a very difficult decision to close Rochester Rising down for good if we don't meet our campaign goal by October 15th. So your support is really critical at this point. If you value what we've built and can offer your support, we need your help. Let's keep telling the real story of entrepreneurship in Rochester, Minnesota. Again, if you can help, if you find value in what we're doing here, please consider donating to our fundraising campaign anytime now through October 15th. You can find out more about our fundraising campaign on our website or through the link in our bio. So this week on the podcast, I got to chat with the incredible Betsy Wall of Betsy Wall Photography. I sat down with Betsy to do this recording in June. We had just laid out our podcasting space in the Mayo Clinic Business Accelerator. It was one of the first podcasts we did in person back in June. And it was just a really great feeling to get back to doing in-person podcasts again. So Betsy came to Minnesota to study computer science at Bethel University in St. Paul, where she also met her husband, Pete. While Betsy's strengths align with a career in software engineering, she really knew that she was a people person, and she felt isolated sitting in front of a computer all day in her software engineering job. So after taking some engagement photos for her sister-in-law, Having no prior photography experience, she took on a part-time job as an assistant photographer while keeping her software engineering job. Eventually, Betsy built out her experience, built up her clientele, and struck out full-time on her own. So you won't want to miss out on this super engaging conversation I had with Betsy today as we talk more about her photography business, how she built up a very focused customer base, her move to Rochester 7 years ago, and much more. We had recorded this podcast such a long time ago that I forgot some of what we talked about. We took a super deep dive into the Rochester running community and had a really great conversation about that. For those of you wondering, we talk about a Collider running group that we got together for the Med City Half Marathon, which actually just took place on Sunday. So this is complete coincidence that this podcast came out this week. I did not save it for this. I actually forgot we had even talked about it with Betsy. But we did run the Med City Marathon with 4 different members of Collider. Just took place on Sunday. My legs are still sore, but we had such a great experience. All right, before we launch into today's conversation with Betsy, I just wanted to acknowledge our sponsor, Clifton Larson Allen, or CLA. The team at CLA would love to get to know you, learn about your vision, and see if they can help. CLA is a full-service CPA firm with over 100 offices nationally, including right here in Rochester. Sure, they do taxes and audits, but they also focus on helping startups refine their vision, build budgets, work with banks and investors, and track and organize their accounting. They are deeply experienced at building the business systems that allow you to focus on what you do best: getting product market fit, growing sales, hiring talent, and creating a thriving enterprise. Contact Todd Churchill at toddchurchill@claconnect.com or give him a call at 507-280-2317 to learn more. All right, so now on to today's podcast with Betsy Wall of Betsy Wall Photography. All right, well, Betsy, thanks so much for coming here today and sitting down and being on the podcast in our brand new setup, which hopefully stays for a while.
It looks awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I usually like to start by asking people to share a little bit of your background and about yourself. So, can you share a little bit about you and hobbies and interests? So what makes you you as a person?
Yeah. So I moved to Minnesota for college, and I went to Bethel University up in the Twin Cities, and I was a computer science major, and that's where I met my husband, Pete, and we lived in the Twin Cities for a while after that, and we both were into software engineering. And then I switched to the photographer thing. And then it was when we had our first daughter, Grace. She's almost 9 now. We just started to look at our life. My husband grew up in Rochester. And we just said, where do we want to plant and raise our family? And we picked Rochester. And so we moved down here and love it so much. And my life right now and my interests are so much different than they were pre-kids. Life is really busy right now. So I'm a business owner and a mother, and I caught the running bug a few years ago, and I absolutely love the running community here in Rochester. So shout out to them. So when I have free time, I like to be running. Laps around Silver Lake, dodging the geese.
So yeah, I am a huge runner too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, also in Silver Lake. That's kind of far for me from my house, but if I'm going on like an 8-mile run, I can make it there.
Well, okay, we're gonna go running together then.
But, yeah, I'm a huge runner. Been a runner. Actually, always played sports in high school and college. Not really. I mean, because it was, like we were talking about, it was really hard for me. So I was focused on school. But yeah, when I came here and got into grad school, I got into running, which I'd always done for a little bit, like let's say 2 to 3 miles just for conditioning.
Yeah.
Because I noticed it made me faster because I played tennis, basketball, softball. pretty good at softball. I played that since I was like 4 years old, but like it made me faster. So then I got into running and I'm doing it for 15 years now.
No way.
I love it. Like I took a 2-week break and just got back into it yesterday.
It's so addicting. And I love that seems to be one of these sports that everyone's invited. Like no matter where you are, your pace, how far, and that's what I love about the Rochester running community. It's so inclusive and encouraging, and the trail systems here are incredible. So I run when I have spare time. I'm a big people person, like just my friends. It's hanging out with friends, and I love getting to know people, and that's me. So
it is a nice place to run. Like people don't appreciate like when you don't have a trail system, how hard it is. Like it's really boring to run on sidewalks through neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And really hard. So I fully appreciate that where my parents live, they converted old railway beds to rails. It's called rails to trails. But they never had that when I was growing up. So I would run on like country roads, which was not safe.
No, it's not. Right. I know. Been there.
But now I love the rails to trail system.
So
except
cool.
You don't appreciate that it is on an incline because trains would go,
sure,
slightly downhill if possible. If you're going one way, you're like, wow, my shins are like killing me. And then you like look at your watch and you're like, that was pretty. Or, look at the elevation afterwards because, if you're a runner, you understand what we're talking about. But, we are putting together a Collider running team for the Med City Half Marathon, too. So if you're interested, it's a loose team. We're just, like, going together and running.
Yeah.
So if anyone's listening, too, who wants to do it, we're...
I'm doing the Healthy Human in August, so I should be conditioned because that one's in October, isn't it?
September.
Okay.
Like Labor Day weekend, or the one after that, I believe. So I'm a little worried because I'm not a hot weather person.
Me neither.
But I am also doing the one in
October,
October, which will be better, I think, for me.
Fun.
I remember reading about that too on your webpage when you mentioned running, and I wanted to bring that up, but one of those things I thought I would remember and did not. We wanted to talk about your business. So can you share what that is and what your kind of focus and area of expertise is?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting because this business has evolved over the years. I've been a full-time photographer for 13 years now, and I started up in the Twin Cities. So I would say the first half or more was solely based out of the Twin Cities, and my focus and expertise was events and weddings. So that's what I did, and my goal is to start out and do it really, really well. And I did do families, but it was more like mini sessions, and that was at the time I was in my early 20s, mid 20s. And then as I grew older and had kids of my own, I started to add more portraits and families because it sort of reflected what I had going on in my life. And I understood as a parent, like what I would want for those. And then also the coolest thing is that I photographed, well over 300 weddings. And now I have a lot of my couples have been married for 10 years and have kids and a minivan. And so we're kind of growing up together. And so now I would say my focus has flip-flopped to more on the families and portrait side of things. And I still do weddings. They're not as compatible with my season of life just because my kids are in school. So I want to be around more on weekends.
I think that makes sense. Once your life is changing and your interests change, you kind of hone in on that with your clientele. Like you said, you're kind of growing up together. Too,
right.
So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I heard once that, and I don't know how true this is, but it seems true to me that, you sell best to like people within 10 years of your actual age. And that seems pretty accurate to me.
That would make a lot of sense. Right. And I love weddings, and I would still photograph weddings today, but and now there's even an element of you can love something, but now that I am a mom and my life has changed so much, what part of the business is compatible with my life in this chapter? And I'm sure in another 5 years that might look different too.
Yeah, and I knew a lot of wedding videographers, and they're like, it's the whole day. Like, it's hard. And pretty much your summer. I mean, what is wedding season? April through October, roughly?
Yeah.
You're busy.
And what's
your
unique
maker.
is like, and it doesn't matter what's happening in your life, I show up. Like, you could have a family emergency and I can't cancel on a wedding.
Right.
I wouldn't want to do that to them. And so, especially once my kids started to get older and in more events and things like that, I still love them and I still do some weddings a year, but I couldn't do as many just because I needed to be more available or flexible if something were to happen.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, you cannot cancel on a wedding.
No,
That would be
no matter what happens. Yeah.
I was interested in, so we talked a little bit in the beginning, you went to school for computer science.
Yeah.
What was your interest in that originally? What drew you into computer science and then into photography? So what was kind of that path like for you?
I wouldn't change my path for anything. I met my husband in the computer science program. I was the only girl in the whole department.
I believe that, yeah.
And so I met him there, and it's like you wouldn't change the path you took because I'm so grateful for where I am today. I've always been a nerd. I'm a complete geek. I love video games and science fiction. I am on a podcast admitting this out loud, but that's just who I am. And so when I didn't even really know what computer science meant. When I was in high school looking at all the different options, I thought, well, I like computers and I'm kind of a geek and like, okay, let's do this. And I have an aptitude for math. And then I was always that kid in high school. I would be pulled out of the classroom to go help teachers with computer problems. So for whatever reason, I would pick up on that stuff. So I went through the program and got my degree. The one thing that I hadn't thought about, and we talked a little bit about this before the podcast, but having an aptitude in something doesn't necessarily mean that's what you should do for a career, because I'm such a people person. I like to be up and walking around. And so my first job out of school, I was in a cube doing computer code all day, and I would have no interaction. And my husband, he's still a software engineer today, and he loves that. That's his happy place, and solving problems behind a computer. And he has meetings and things, but for the most part, for me, it felt very isolating. I've always been very artistic as well. Like, I was the kid in school who just loved art class the most. But that was one of those, people, why don't you be an art teacher? I think you have to have a passion for education and wanting to be in a classroom of kids.
That's hard.
That is an amazing skill that I don't have.
It's hard work.
So hard. And I knew right away that that's not where my passion was. And I was like, I don't really know what else to do with an art degree. So I didn't pursue that route. And I didn't even think about photography as an option until it was my sister-in-law got engaged, and I was the artistic one in the family. And, hey, why don't you take my pictures? Okay.
So did you have any experience with photography?
No, they were terrible. Like, in hindsight, sorry, Sarah. Looking back on it, but it was just like, here's a camera, and why don't you try this? And then I ended up going, I guess people do this for a living. So I emailed her wedding photographer, Jackie Bolt, who's now one of my dearest friends. And for Jackie, she didn't know who I was, but she was the kind of person who said, well, let's meet for coffee. And she took the time to meet with me, and then she ended up hiring me as a assistant. And so I worked for Jackie for a couple years. And then all the while I was working my business hour computer job. And then after a while, I realized I had enough of my own photography business, because I'd worked the nights and weekend hustle in addition to my day job. And the scale started to tip where I realized I think I could do better as a photographer, and I have enough work. And I was married to a man with health insurance.
That's a big help.
It's a big deal. So I'm a very, I'm not a huge risk taker, actually, which I know is unique for entrepreneurs. So thank goodness I have a husband who is just like, he's always supports whatever crazy idea I have or want to do. He just high fives me and says, go do it. And, we had that health insurance and I took the leap. So
I think the health insurance is a big thing that holds people back because it's super expensive.
Oh, yeah.
Families on, $1,000 a month of in the private market. That's a huge barrier. I mean, plus, not really having a stable income or not knowing
right.
when it's going to become, semi-stable. I mean, that's a huge problem for entrepreneurs.
Oh, yeah. And I think there are some personalities who maybe are more, they're fine taking the risk and making that leap and it doesn't bother. But I'm just, safety and security is a big thing for me. And so I don't know if I would have the guts to do it without those things. So I'm just very grateful to have had a husband who has always encouraged me and he kind of pushes me and says, go for it.
I feel you need that. You need that in your life. I was the same way, even like we were talking when we started, how I went from science to this and I don't think I would have. I took an unpaid internship that my husband told me, you have time to do this. Just do it. And
go for it.
It's one of those things you look back at your life and you're like, if I hadn't made that decision or made a different one, it would be completely different.
Yeah.
And I think if I had not had that push and that support, I don't know that I would be here right now.
I think a lot about the time I emailed Jackie Bolt. Hi, my name is Betsy, and I kind of think I want to do photography. Would you meet me? It happened to be a wonderful person like Jackie on the other side of that email who said, I will meet you for coffee. And she's so generous with her time. And what if she wasn't? What if it was someone else who just didn't want to, was too busy or maybe was like, don't waste my time. I think about that moment. I don't know if I would be a photographer today because I would have said, well, okay, and moved on back to my computer job. So I'm just very grateful for those people.
Yeah, I feel like most entrepreneurs and business owners, at least 3/4 of them are very open to having coffee and just chatting with you and helping you out. There's a quarter that just aren't interested or super busy and they're usually not mean about it. They're just I just don't have time for this right now. And it's just respecting boundaries. Okay, I hear you. You're super busy. You don't have time. But most of the time, it's either a non-response or a very positive response from somebody.
So it's interesting because in the photography industry, technically, I mean, we're competition. It's a very saturated market. However, what I had going in the Twin Cities a lot, all of my best friends are photographers and we work together, even though technically we're competition. We share advice. We're calling each other what would you do in this situation? We refer each other business and we all grow together. And I've found that taking that time and building those relationships help everybody succeed. And that's what I love about the photographer community in general, is that I feel like we're more like colleagues and coworkers than competition.
Yeah, and I think that's super important because when it's a dog eat dog, it's not very pleasant for anybody.
No, I mean, and it's out there, right? Because
it is,
especially in the industry. If you have a certain look or a style, some people want to keep those secret or their technique or whatever close, and I understand that. They maybe wouldn't want to share those things. But you find your people, and I have my great group of photographer friends, and we all do better because of it. So,
yeah, I think it's interesting you have a very technical background and drawn to photography. And I was talking to someone once a few years ago, Brendan Bush, who used to own a photography studio right in Silver Lake there. And he was saying, photography is very, very technical. Because there are so many settings, there are so many ways you can manipulate, a photo either during, while you're taking the photo, and I'm sure there's a more industry-related term for that, and then post production. But it's something that technical people are drawn to because of the nature of it.
Yep, exactly. I mean, I think there's a spectrum in the photography community. There's the more left brain, the more right brain, but I am drawn to it because it is very, very technical. The best way I can describe it is it's like a golf swing where anyone can pick up a camera and take a nice photo. But, you have professional golfers, they have the same clubs and the same tools, but they're really, really good at consistently getting that amazing shot, right? And I think photography is kind of the same. The more technical expertise and experience you have, you can produce a lot of quality in a smaller amount of time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I can see, I have to take photos for what I'm doing, and I can tell the difference between my photos and like someone who actually knows what they're doing. It's just like, you can just tell it's that much better. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a skill like being a chef or like anyone.
Even like the
skill.
whole staging thing, you learn how to do that and like what works and what doesn't work and how people's eye flows through a photo. So yeah, it's definitely an acquired skill and like skill building to get good at it.
Yeah.
So we talked about, how you transitioned into photography and then, got to the point where you're like, okay, now I have more of my own work, so it makes sense to go in on my own business. So, what did that look like for you to take that first step and start kind of in the Twin Cities? Like, did you have business experience prior? How did you kind of get started?
I didn't. And it's interesting because I'll get emails, hey, I'm interested in becoming a photographer. Would you share? And most people are super interested to talk about the photography part of it. And I always back up and say, the first thing you need to know is it's running a business.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that when I started. And you learn trial by fire. Is that the expression? You learn really fast that you have to start to understand the fundamentals of running a business because that's the only way you'll survive. You can be an amazing photographer, but in the end, you have to run it like a business to be successful and to even be able to do it for a living. So I learned by trial and error, and you make a mistake and you change something and you move forward. And I feel like some things you get worked out to a system, but I think entrepreneurs, it's a constant learning curve. Yeah.
It is always a constant learning curve. And
there's always something. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with you. Having the business, the fundamentals of the business and understanding like who your customers are is key no matter what you're doing, Otherwise, you could be the best photographer in the world, but if you don't know how to market it or keep books or like find customers, then you're just a really great photographer.
You're just a really great photographer, but in the end, I have to, make a living like everybody else. And someone once said to me something that, I had some frustrating situation, and they said, in all things, step back and say, okay, why did this happen? Is there anything I can do next time to get ahead of this? Is it better communication? Is there anything that I could have done? Even if you think, this wasn't my fault, there might be something. And so anytime I run into a snag, I try to get through it and then step back and go, how can I rework the business process on my end to make this a better experience for my clients?
Yeah.
Moving forward.
I think that's so true. You either succeed or you learn.
Yep.
Right? There's really nothing in between.
Yeah, it's true.
And I feel that all the time. You have to take some time to process like what happened and like give yourself like half a day or something to just be like angry or sad.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, what actually did I learn?
Right.
And what could I do better?
It's that growth mindset. Yeah. That's so important. And it never stops. It's not like 13 years in, I've got it all figured out.
Oh no. I make like several mistakes every day that then I learn from.
Yes.
And like sometimes people don't notice them. Sometimes they're very noticeable.
Right.
But it's like, it's just what it is. And it's fine in the end. Like nothing catastrophic happens. Everyone's fine.
Right.
Yep. So I wanted to ask you about kind of building up your customer base in the Twin Cities, because I'm guessing you couldn't take any from, your prior work over to your own business. So how did you connect with your first customers and find them and understand who they were?
Yeah. And that took some time to figure out.
Yeah.
Like, who are my clients? Because at first you think anyone who will book me is a client.
Right.
And then you get into it and realize, it all works when we're excited about the same things and share the same vision and have the same priorities. And thank goodness, right? I'm so grateful there are so many different styles and types of photographers out there to meet all the different personalities and needs of the clients. And so I think there's a couple different business structures. You can be a volume photographer. I ended up veering toward, I'd rather do smaller amount of commissions of really high quality work. So that ended up being my focus with weddings. And so online advertising works for some businesses, doesn't necessarily work for that type of client. And so I did a little online advertising and I had some traction through there, but they weren't really the best fit for clients. And so it starts by word of mouth and it kind of grows there. But then I started to hone in on who my clients were and where they were coming from. And what it ended up being were, because this was back at the time I did events. And most of the weddings I did were a certain type of client. I was usually at the Country Club, Interlochen, Lafayette Club, Minnetonka Club. I would just rotate. And so there were a handful of wedding planners that I really clicked with, and we shared the same type of clients. And so I developed those relationships and I invested in those relationships. And I'm so grateful for them because their clients would hire them, and they had a certain type of client that we shared the same type of couple, and then they would refer me, and the clients trust that referral. And the business really exploded at that time. And then also just other photographers who we had a similar style. Hey, I'm booked. Go check out my friend Jess. She's amazing. And that was another really successful way to build the business. And that looks like marketing just in a different way. Maybe it's sending a gift or, and then venues were another. I would send things to venues, and I'm always very try to be generous with the photos. So like licensing is a whole thing and watermarking is a whole thing, and everyone handles it a little different. And I've always been very relaxed. Like, hey, you've supported my business so much. Anything I can do, I just straight up give them photos at their venue or their event to use for their business and promotion too. So we had that type of relationship. And that's, in the end, I think was the most successful way to build my clientele. And then also investing into my clients. So I tried to turn them into cheerleaders. So not just provide a really great product and experience, but like work so hard for them that they can't help but be really excited about. It wasn't just like I booked my photographer and we got great photos, end of story. The experience with Betsy was so unique and so great that I'm so excited about this that I want to share and tell my friends. And so I just kind of kept my head down and worked really hard for my clients. And then I would do things like send them a welcome packet and then send them a surprise gift they didn't expect, sometime after booking and before their wedding. And then after the wedding, they got another something. So that's marketing dollars. But instead of putting it online or wherever, it was more of a targeted, focused effort. And it works because they're happy, but then extra, extra happy when they get these unexpected things. And then they send their friends.
I think that's something that a lot of like new entrepreneurs forget about a lot. Like you were saying, we've never had much luck either just doing digital marketing. And it's probably because we don't know how to do it very well. A bit of it, a small part of that, but it's all relationship based. And it takes longer, but then in the end you have these like lifelong relationships with people. Like you were saying, you're taking their wedding photos and now you're taking like their family photos. So it's just like transitioning and growing with your customers. And like you were saying, I'll get cards in the mail every once in a while when someone will see something I'm not a huge Facebook person, but people will see something on Facebook, like when I got married a few years ago, and they're like, oh, just send you a card, like congratulations or something. And it means a lot because it's like that person actually took time to like sit down and write a card out.
Cards. I am such a believer in the handwritten card. Thank you cards to the planner and the couple. are huge. And then what's interesting is, so that was really effective for weddings because I did a smaller amount of larger commissions. Now that I'm transitioning into family portraits, that has to be a volume business. I can't just have 25 clients a year. I need to do a lot more volume. And that's where probably the online marketing and it is effective because you need to get the word out to a lot more people, and you wouldn't have the bandwidth to send every single family client something. So, and this is one of these, because I'm transitioning, I feel like there's such a steep learning curve. I'm the same photographer I was, years ago, but now that my focus is changing, I feel like the entire business model is changing, and I am figuring it out as I go. It's like a whole different beast.
Your entire customer base is changing.
My location, my customer base, how it works. I would maybe have 25 weddings a year, and now I need lots more than that. And it's just a whole different game. And I'm figuring it out. Here I am feeling like same photographer, totally different game.
Yeah, even after you say 10 years or more that you've been a professional photographer. Yeah.
Yeah, now I'm feel like I'm back to square one, figuring out the business aspect of it. Yeah.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially like you said, you have the one business model around the weddings and events, and then it's changing, volume, how you reach people. It's when you were doing or figuring out, that your customer was weddings and events, did you have to turn anyone down that you feel didn't fit that customer? Or, because that's hard for people.
Oh, it's so hard. And there were times when I would get an inquiry just in the nature of how they, the details or how they asked. I kid you not, I would get things like, see attached picture of my fiance and I. Were extremely attractive people that you would be really grateful to have on your portfolio. So you should give us a huge discount.
That's real weird.
It is. I have so many crazy stories like that where I'm just so I would just say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm unavailable.
That seems a little high maintenance too.
Yeah. Oh, it was the funniest thing. It's the attractive person discount, I guess, is what they were asking for. So
weird.
Yeah, I have all kinds of stories. And then I would always meet. There were probably some couples where in the end everyone was happy, but I thought, oh, was I maybe the perfect fit? An interesting thing is that Pinterest wasn't around when I started. And so it started out as, we really have seen your website and resonate with your style, and we really want to book you for for you and your style. Then Pinterest was invented, and over the years it's started to become, not with everybody, but with some, more of they'd book you because they like you and they like your work. But then when it came down to the planning process, here's a printout of these images on Pinterest. Can you just recreate these? And that's tricky because the opportunity to take a photo that matches may not even be there, because a lot more goes into something than meets the eye. And that, this may not be the best pose for you, or this is set in a field in the sunset somewhere in the South, and we're here in Minnesota in January. I can't do this for you. Or it's just this is never the way my eye would work or my processing would work. So that was the struggle. And I really want every single client to be super happy, but I'm also I can only be me. So there were some times where I felt we'd book, but then the Pinterest requests would come into a level of shoot, I hope I can make them happy, because these photos aren't necessarily my natural style, if that makes sense.
Well, it makes total sense, and it's something you would not appreciate if you're not a photographer. I'm sure that was a nightmare where everyone comes to you now with Pinterest and this is what I want, please do this.
Yeah.
And
it's this mix of, my job is to provide you the photos that you're looking for, and I am here for that. But sometimes with these Pinterest things, it's maybe not possible to do, or to do it well, or maybe a lot of this is but the lighting's different and this pose wouldn't necessarily be flattering for this situation. And so it's this stance of really doing what you're hired to do, but knowing that if I know this could be done probably in a more effective way or a better way, how can I communicate this and like work that out so everyone's happy?
Yeah, you have to add in your professional opinion and expertise. Right?
Yeah, and that's just part of the way the industry has changed really dramatically in the last 12, 13 years.
Yeah.
So
like you were saying, you transitioned from the Twin Cities down to Rochester. So what was that kind of experience like? What did that mean for your business?
Oh, I'm still figuring it out. And I will be fully transparent about that. Because my business is primarily word of mouth. And I actually have to physically be there to do my job, unlike some other products or businesses. So when we moved down, I think we've been in Rochester for 7 years now. I just commuted a lot, and I didn't even focus on building my business. And at the same time in Rochester, but at the same time I was in that, like, I had an infant and then I had another one on the way. I didn't have the bandwidth or even the desire to grow things down here.
It's just adding more energy that you probably didn't have to give at that time.
Yeah. And I had already like put my foot on the gas. I mean, in my 20s before kids, any entrepreneur will understand it is all consuming. I mean, it was photography nonstop every day, all day to get things going. And then there's a point where you kind of feel like you've had your foot on the gas for a while and you can kind of coast a little bit because you have enough business and enough clients and word of mouth. And so that's where we were when I moved here, and I just commuted for a couple years. And then by the time I had my second baby, I just was completely burnt out from the driving back and forth. And probably also just being a new mother. So the combination of the two, I had to write emails to my main referrals for business and just say, I said I'm taking a sabbatical, and it killed me to write the email, but I knew I had to recognize it just wasn't going to work long term. And so it kind of exploded the business a little bit, and I had some traction down here. And then for the last 4 years, I've just almost intentionally, I've been getting some traction, but I haven't been putting in any intentional effort to rebuild things down here because I'm intentionally making that choice to be very part-time with my young ones. But now they're growing up. My little guy will be in kindergarten and just not this year, but the next year. And I think that's going to look and feel a lot different than where we are now. And so I'm kind of looking at this as a great opportunity to relaunch and reinvent. And I'm still figuring out what that's going to look like.
But I think good for you for like understanding what you need as like a person to survive and to thrive and to feed off of, like you said in the beginning, you know, understanding that you couldn't sit in a cubicle all the time.
Right.
And that's not something we really take into the, at least, you know, whatever in the 2000s that we really thought about, you know, growing up as kids in high school. Like no one talked to you about what do you need as a person to survive. Like it was just like you push through it and you'll be fine. And that's what everyone does.
It's a little formulaic. Like you're going to go to college and you're good at math. So you're going to do this and
you're just going to like it.
And you're just going to like it. And then I didn't even recognize that I was an entrepreneur and like had a passion for entrepreneurship until I was one for many years. And then it hit me like, what if I'm just wired differently than like my husband, who's super happy at his job? I kind of like, I'm a glutton for punishment is what I joke. Like, I think I'm really into the entrepreneurship thing. And I think it's kind of great to have an opportunity to change and reinvent, and figure out what that looks like.
That's like the ultimate journey of the entrepreneur is changing and reinventing the whole way.
Yeah. And it was a little hard for me to admit that because things were going so well before. Why would I want to change that? But I also had to recognize as a mom and somebody who moved cities that there are chapters in life, and it's okay to close a chapter and start a new one, and then a new one, and then a new one. So that's what I'm trying to look at this as. I'm going to be starting a new chapter soon, and we'll see what happens.
I think that's really interesting because everyone who comes in, we run a business education class at Collider, and we try and help everyone understand that like the idea you come in with is probably not what you're even going to end the 8 weeks with or what you're going to be with a year from now. And it's really hard. I mean, it might be the same general guts of a business, like photography, but what your focus is and what your day-to-day is probably way different than what you thought in the beginning.
Like I tell people I'm a photographer and most people go, well, that sounds fun. Well, okay. I would say 10-20% of my job is the photos. The rest of it is admin, marketing. It's running a business. Yeah. And I had no idea that's what it was going to be like when I started. So yeah, it looks a lot different than most people think it's going to be. Yeah.
So most people who listen into the podcast are, thinking about starting a business or maybe at the early stages. Would you have anything to share with them that they should maybe be thinking about, that you were thinking about, or maybe you didn't realize?
Yeah.
I guess you kind of just said it, but like what kind of surprised you, or what should people be thinking about as they're getting started?
I think like it's so boring, but keeping really good track of your finances and understanding the basics of overhead and your pricing structure and why you need to charge what you need to. And I think that's actually what pretty misunderstood for people who aren't entrepreneurs. Gosh, why is a photographer charged so much, or the mechanic charged so much? Insert any small business. Well, it's because I have to pay for the marketing and all the you don't understand. Like when my husband goes to work, his company provides the computer and the software and the licensing and the insurance and all of that. And I think, especially because I started photography not understanding what it's like to run a business, I didn't understand why. I think my first year as a photographer, I literally made $0 because all of it went straight back into the business. And so it's trying to understand and read and get a grasp of like why you need to price what you need to and where does that money go, because the business is like its own entity that needs to be funded so you're even able to do the thing that you set out to do, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's a lot harder to price a service-based business than something where you're selling a physical product, because you can look at like the cost of goods that go into making it. But like you're saying, there actually are like cost of goods going into a service-based business, like your equipment, like your insurance,
marketing, insurance, my websites and accountants. I'm also a firm believer that I'm not great at everything, and it's really important to identify those areas and outsource and hire help for people who do specialize in that. So you find a good accountant, and that's important because that's not my wheelhouse. And so those are all things that are so boring to think about when you're like, I really want to do the photography thing, and that's what you're passionate about. But that's absolutely critical for any entrepreneur to understand before getting started. And then another thing is that I'm going to assume this is maybe similar with a lot of entrepreneurs, but comparison is just, especially in my industry, there's so many talented photographers out there. And when you start looking around, I start to like, oh, why couldn't I have taken the shot that way? Or the comparison can be really hard for me. And so I had to actually just shut it all off and just try to focus on what I can do and keep my head down. Because as soon as you start to look at the competition or what else is out there, for me, it was just really, you kind of get frozen a little bit because it can scare you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I totally understand that. And I think a lot of people do too. Everyone does that. Even looking at marketing and saying, why couldn't I be doing what they're doing in terms of marketing?
Right. Yeah.
It's not you. That's somebody else.
Right. Or, say you have an idea for a product or something, you can look around there. There's probably something similar. There's a lot of products or restaurants or whatever it is where, sure, somebody else might know how to make a good hamburger, but you do it your way. And if you do it really well, it will succeed. And so you just have to kind of keep in your lane and have confidence in what you can do.
I always think being different is what people are looking for.
Yes. Yes.
So my last question for you, and we talked about it a little bit. Why do you feel that you're drawn to entrepreneurship? What passion do you have for this? Why do you love it?
I'm still trying to figure that out.
And that's totally fair.
It's kind of a rush a little bit, isn't it? And, I mean, as a runner, I will have these moments where I will put down my work at 10 in the morning on a beautiful spring day and go on a run and then come back. And I realize like what a privilege it is to be able, I'm working long hours. Mm-hmm. I'm still working, but to have that ownership and flexibility is really incredible. So I'm grateful for that. Do you know the podcast, How I Built This?
Yep.
I am borderline obsessed with that podcast and Shark Tank. Mm. And so it was after I realized I don't think anybody else follows CEOs like they're celebrities, but I do. I just am so completely fascinated with that. I don't know exactly why that is, but I'm just interested in entrepreneurship in general. It's a passion. Like I love reading about companies and owners and their process, and it's like outside of photography. So, yeah.
I think the flexibility definitely is a huge perk that draws many people to it. That was my last question for you. I'll ask you for any final thoughts and where is the best place for people to find you and your business?
Well, I just want to thank you for inviting me on the podcast. And I think there's so much talent here in Rochester. And I think it's really great. As someone who's just passionate about entrepreneurship in general, I love what you're doing. So thank you. My website is just betsywall.com. And that's where you can find me. And thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Betsy, for taking time today on this beautiful summer day.
Of course.
And so many lessons learned to share with people. So thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
That was such an incredible conversation with Betsy. Thank you so much, Betsy, for your time and sitting down and sharing this story and your journey with the community. You can learn more about Betsy Wall Photography by checking out the links in our show notes. To everyone listening in, thanks so much for tuning into the podcast today. If you were listening in and you thought, I know somebody who would really benefit from hearing this conversation today, please share this podcast with them. That is really what we want to do here, is share lessons learned from entrepreneurs in the community with others who are thinking about starting a business who have started a business here in the community, to learn from each other. All right, that is a wrap for us at the podcast today for episode 242. If you enjoyed today's podcast, we ask you to just take a few moments to make sure that you are subscribed wherever you listen in. And please rate the podcast wherever you are listening so that others can find it and can hear these stories of entrepreneurship coming out of Rochester, Minnesota. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today, and we will see you here next Wednesday with a brand new episode.